This is the testimony of Vessar Talk, requisition adjutant of the 3rd Conquered Expeditionary Sweep, recorded because I am the only one left to record it. I will tell it in the order it happened. I will not soften the count, because there is no count left to soften. We came down on the harvest world in the gray hour before its sun cleared the eastern ridge, 4 drop hulls in the requisition barge, 1,100 under arms and another 200 of us in assessment and supply. The world was logged. I had logged it myself, 3 sweeps prior from orbit, green listed, hazard negligible, a single agrarian population dispersed, unmechanized for war, no orbital defense, no fleet, no record of resistance in 2 centuries of conquered cataloging. My own hand had written the word compliant in the margin of the survey, and the word had cost me nothing then. The ledgers said the world owed us. That is how the conquered thinks of a green world, not as a place but as a balance, a surplus that has not yet been collected. The grain terraces ran in long gold steps down from the high ground to the river flats, and the wind moved through them in slow combs, and the prefect commander stood at the head of the ramp and looked at all that gold, and said it would feed 3 garrison fleets through a winter campaign. He was not wrong about the grain. He was wrong about everything else, but the grain was real. His name was Asan Rak. Among my people he was considered careful. I want that understood. The thing I am about to describe was not done by a fool. Rak had taken 60 worlds and lost none of them, and he read a population the way I read a manifest, and when he came down that ramp he had already decided how the day would go, and his decision was reasonable given everything we knew. Everything we knew was the problem. The humans were waiting for us in the thrashing yard. That was the first wrongness, and I filed it and moved on, because filing and moving on is what I am for. A green population, seeing 4 drop holes come down out of the dark with the engine glare lighting the underside of the clouds, should scatter. Should run for the tree line, the cellars, the far terraces. Should at the very least mill and cry out and clutch its young. These did not. Perhaps 40 of them stood in the open yard among the thrashing floors and the grain towers, and they had come out to meet us, and they were not armed, and they did not run. They watched us land the way a man watches whether he has seen before. I stood at Rak's shoulder with the assessment slate and I logged it as fatalistic resignation, low cohesion, no flight response note, possible prior contact, possible doctrine of submission. I logged it as a people who had been taken before and knew the shape of being taken. That was a comfortable thing to write. It let me keep my certainty. I have thought about that line more than any other thing I have ever written in the time since. An old woman stood at the front of them. She was small. I want to be exact about this because the exactness is the whole of it. She came up perhaps to the middle of Rak's chest plate, and the Sazerayan are not a tall people. She was old in the way their kind goes old, the skin gone thin and brown and creased like worked leather, the hands large at the knuckle from a life of work, the hair white and bound back plain. She wore a coat the color of dust and a leather apron stiff with chaff, and she had a short curved blade at her belt that was a tool for cutting grain and nothing more. She was not a soldier. I had her on the slate inside of a breath, and the slate agreed with my eyes. A non-combatant, female, aged, occupation agricultural, threat index negligible. The slate is very good. The slate was right about all of it except the last word, and the last word is the only one that matters. Rak addressed them through the carry speaker in the trade cant the Conquered uses on green worlds. He told them what they already were to us. He told them the harvest was assessed and forfeit, that the grain towers would be emptied to the barge, that the population would render labor for the loading and would be compensated at the standard green rate, which is to say not at all, and that compliance would be total and immediate. He told them because Rak was careful that resistance had a defined consequence and that the consequence was not negotiable. He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. It is one of the things they admired about him. The old woman listened to all of it. When the carry speaker went quiet, she was silent for a moment, and the wind moved the grain, and then she spoke, and she did not use the carry speaker. She just spoke, and her voice was low and dry and carried further than it had any right to. She said, "You've come a long way for it. You may as well come and take it." I logged it as compliance. Of course I did. The words were the words of compliance. Subject acknowledges forfeiture, offers no resistance, invites collection. I wrote it down, and I felt the small, clean satisfaction of a balance about to be brought into order, and Rack gave the word, and the loading detail moved up into the thrashing yard with their grav sleds and their counting frames, 200 underarms behind them in a loose cordon, and the humans stepped aside to let them through. They stepped aside. They did not scatter and they did not resist. They simply opened, the 40 of them, and let 200 of us walk up into the heart of their settlement, in among the grain towers and the thrashing floors and the long, low stone buildings where they stored the year, and they closed up again behind us, soft and unhurried, the way water closes behind a stone you have dropped into it. I should have read it then. The reading was there to be done. A people that neither fights nor flees but opens, that is not submission. Submission cringes. Submission gives ground at the edge and clusters at the center and watches the strong with its head down. This was none of that. This was a thing that had decided, long before our hulls touched its sky, exactly how far it would let us come. But I am an adjutant of requisition, and I have collected the surplus of 60 worlds, and on every one of them the moment of greatest danger looks exactly like the moment of greatest ease. So I logged collection proceeding, no incident, and I did not understand that I had just watched a snare close, slow and patient, in broad gray daylight, with all of us walking into it counting grain. The sun came up over the eastern ridge. I remember the light changing because of what it showed me. The flat gray went to a hard, clean gold, the kind of light that has no mercy in it and hides nothing, and in that light I saw the harvest world properly for the first time, and the small wrongnesses I had been filing and moving past all stood up together and became one large wrongness that I could no longer set down. The grain was too tall. Not metaphor, measurement. I am an adjutant, I measure for a living. The terraces ran with a grain that stood a full head above any cultivar in the Concord seed catalog, heavy-eared, deep-rooted, and when I put the slate on it, the slate could not match it to anything and returned, in the small, patient language of the slate, unclassified. The trees beyond the river flats were enormous, dark, slow, older than any forest should be on a world this size. And the gravity. I had logged the gravity from orbit as within tolerance, and it was within tolerance, just at the high edge of it, the kind of pull that a Sazerayan barely registers stepping off the ramp and that grinds at the joints by the third hour. And these old farmers in their dust-colored coats walked through it as though it weighed nothing. Because to them, it weighed nothing. Because they had been bred in it across a span of generations, I had not bothered to calculate. Because the catalog said agrarian and I had stopped reading. The air was thick. The water, when one of the loading detail drank from a yard trough, put him on his back inside the hour with something in it our Medici could not name. The insects that lifted off the grain at the heat of the day were the size of my hand, and the loaders swatted them and laughed, and 3 of those loaders were dead by midday from the swelling. None of it was an attack. That is the thing I could not make Rack understand, in the brief time left to make him understand anything. None of it was aimed at us. It was simply the world, going about being the world, and the world was lethal in every quiet particular, and the people who had grown up inside it were the thing the world had made. I went to Rack in the thrashing yard at the second hour, and I told him I wanted to amend the world's grading. He was watching the grain towers empty onto the sleds, and the count climbing on his frame, and he did not look at me. I told him 3 of the detail were dead, and the water was poison, and the grain was off catalog, and the gravity was at the ceiling, and the population had not run and had not fought and had opened, and that I no longer believed green was the right word, and that I wanted the collection paused, while assessment caught up to what assessment had missed. He asked me what threat I had observed, a specific, ranked, defensible threat. That is the correct question, and he was right to ask it, and I had none. I had a count of accidents and a feeling in the seam of my chest. The dead were dead of the water and the air and their own carelessness, not of any human hand. No human had lifted a weapon. No human had raised a voice. The old woman in the dust coat stood at the edge of the yard with her hands folded and watched the towers empty into our sleds, with an expression I could not read, and have spent a long time trying to. And not one of her people had done anything I could put on a slate as hostile. "They are giving us the harvest," Rack said. "You want me to stop taking a harvest that is being given, on the strength of bad water and tall wheat?" Said plainly like that it was absurd, and I felt it as absurd, and I stood there in the gold light at the high ceiling of the gravity with my certainty draining out of me and no fact to replace it, and I said nothing, and the collection went on. I have asked myself since whether I could have stopped it. The honest answer is no. There was nothing to point at. That was the design. They gave us nothing to point at, and they let us take the grain, because the grain was never the thing that mattered to them, and our certainty was the door they meant to walk us through. It was a young officer who broke the quiet. It is always the young ones. Their certainty has not yet had a world break it. His name does not matter, and I will not record it. He was running the cordon at the western tower, and an old man among the humans was slow getting clear of a sled path, slow because of his age, not because of any defiance, and the young officer struck him. Not with a weapon. With the back of his foreclaw, the way you move a beast. The old man went down in the chaff and did not get up quickly, and the young officer stood over him and said something in the trade cant about the pace of compliance. The yard did not react the way a green yard reacts. A green yard, when one of its own is struck, makes a sound. A flinch runs through it, a drawing in, the small animal noise of a people learning again what it costs to be slow. This yard made no sound at all. 40 humans stopped what they were doing all at once, without a signal I could see, and turned and looked at the young officer, and the looking was the most frightening thing I had witnessed in 60 worlds, and I did not yet know why. The old woman crossed the yard. She did not hurry. That is what I keep returning to. She walked the way she had stood, unhurried, exact, her large knuckled hands loose at her sides, and the young officer turned to face her with his weapon coming up out of habit, and she did not stop walking, and she said in the trade cant, in that low, dry voice that carried, "He's old like me, we're slow in the mornings." The young officer told her to step back. He was within his orders. He had the weapon up. She was small and unarmed and aged, and she was inside the reach of a Sazrian combat officer with a charged sidearm, and the slate on my arm, which had been right about everything except the one thing, rated the encounter as a non-combatant about to learn the price of insolence. She reached up, slow, no heat in it, the way you reach to set a tool back on its hook, and she took the weapon out of his claws. I will try to describe what I saw because the Medici could not afterward, and the recordings the barge took are gone with the barge, and so it falls to me. She did not wrest it from him. There was no struggle in it. She closed one of those large old hands over the housing of the weapon, and the other over his foreclaw where it gripped, and she turned once, with her whole small weight low and her feet set in that high gravity she had been born to. And the weapon came free, and the claw came free of the weapon, and the joint that the claw belonged to came apart in a way. A Sazrian joint is not built to come apart, between one breath and the next, without a sound from her and only one short sound from him. And she was holding the weapon now, loosely, the way she had held the grain knife, like a tool she had no particular use for, and the young officer was on his knees in the chaff making a noise I had not known my own people could make. She did not fire it. She looked at it for a moment as though it were a strange seed, and then she let it fall in the dust, and she turned her back on him, on all of us, the cordon and the cannon and the 1100 under arms. And she walked back to her place at the edge of the yard, and folded her ruined strong hands and waited again. And the 40 turned back to their work. The looking ended. They went back to standing aside while we emptied their towers, as though nothing had happened, because to them a thing had been picked up and set down, that was all. They had shown us exactly once with exactly one of them, what every one of them was, and then they had put it away again and gone back to letting us take the grain. And the message in that was so cold and so total that I felt it go through me like the world's bad water. I went to Rack a second time. I did not ask him to amend the grade. I told him we needed to lift, now with what we had on the sleds, and not come back. I told him I no longer believed the word green, and I told him I no longer believed the count of 40, because a people that fields one of those among its old women and its slow ones does not keep its strength at the front of the yard, and whatever stood among the grain towers and the river trees and the long stone buildings we had walked so deep into was not 40, and was not waiting to be assessed. Rack had seen the joint come apart. He was careful, and he had seen it, and I watched the careful part of him do the arithmetic, and I watched him decide, because he was a prefect commander of the conquered with 1,100 under arms and the surplus of 60 worlds behind him. That one old woman with a trick of leverage did not unmake an entire grading. That fear was the thing that lost worlds. That to lift now on the strength of one broken joint would be to teach every green world from here to the rim that the count could be made to flinch. He gave the order to complete the collection, and to take the old woman and the front rank of them onto the barge as labor and as example. He was not a fool. I have said that, and I will say it again at the end, because it is the only thing that makes the rest of it bearable to have survived. The decision was reasonable. Every decision we made that day was reasonable, given what we knew, and what we knew was a tidy green word in a catalog that some adjutant before me had written in margin ink 200 years ago on a world that he had also never properly read. It began when our detail laid claim to the old woman, and I will tell the rest of it as plainly as I can, though plainness is hard now. They did not resist the taking. I want that understood because it is the whole shape of the thing. When the cordon closed on the front rank to load them onto the barge, the humans did not fight. They let themselves be gathered. They walked toward the barge in the gathering they were put into, unhurried, and the old woman walked among them, and at the foot of the loading ramp she stopped, and she turned, and she looked back up the long gold terraces toward the high ground and the dark old trees, and she did a small thing with one hand low at her side that I logged at the time as nothing. It was not nothing. It was a word in a language that does not use the mouth, spoken to a count we had never seen because they had never let us see it, standing back in the tree line and along the high terraces, and in the cellars beneath the long stone buildings we had walked so deep into. She had let us come all the way in. She had let us empty the towers and strike the old man and lay our claws on her, all the way in, until we were 1,100 under arms standing in a yard with our backs to a tree line on a world we did not understand. And then she lifted one old hand and finished the sentence she had begun when she stood in the thrashing-yard at the gray hour and told us we might as well come and take it. They came out of the world the way the world itself comes at you on a green that is not green, from every quiet particular at once, without warning, without heat. I will not pretend I saw it clearly. No one who saw it clearly lived to give testimony, which is its own kind of evidence. I saw the tree line move, and I understood that it had been full the whole time. I saw the long stone buildings give up what they had been holding. I saw the old ones and the slow ones in the gathering at the ramp stop being old and slow, between one breath and the next, the way the warden's hands had stopped being old when they closed over the weapon. I saw what 1,100 under arms is worth against a people that has spent 2 centuries letting the catalog call it compliant while it bred, in a gravity that grinds our joints and an air that stops our hearts, the thing that the catalog has no word for, and that the old surveys, before the catalogs were tidied, did have a word for. I found the word later. It is not green. The old survey, the one struck through and pulled from the record generations back because a clean catalog is easier to govern than a true one, had marked this world in a red hand that the tidying had missed in one corner of one archived plate. Red line. A red line world. A world the surveyors had walked out of, the few of them who walked out, and recommended be left struck from every ledger and approached by no one for any reason. And the recommendation had been overruled in time by adjutants like me who saw gold terraces from orbit and wrote surplus in the margin. The collection did not last long. I will not dress it up with duration. The duration was an indignity. 1,100 under arms and 4 drop hulls and a requisition barge, against a population we had graded at negligible and counted at 40, and it was over inside the morning in the hard, clean gold light that hides nothing. And the humans did it the way the warden had taken the weapon, without heat, without a raised voice, without anything I could log as rage. They were not angry. That is the thing the Medici could not have recorded and the barge's lost cameras could not have shown, and that I alone can put into the testimony. I was close enough to the warden at the end to see her face, and there was nothing in it. No fury, no triumph, no hate. She was finishing a thing she had decided to finish before our hulls touched her sky, the way she would finish a harvest, the way you bring in a year's grain because the season has turned and the work is the work. Rack died on the ramp of his own barge, and I do not believe he died understanding it, and I have decided to believe that was a mercy. He was careful. He was not a fool. He simply read a people the way he read a manifest, and the manifest had been wrong for 200 years, and there is no carefulness that survives a wrong manifest when the thing being mismeasured is what these people were. They let me live. I have thought about that as long as I have thought about anything. It was not an oversight. Nothing about them was an oversight. That was the whole horror of them, the total absence of accident in anything they chose to do. The warden came up the gold terrace through the quiet after, through the stilled sleds and the emptied cordon, unhurried, her large old hands loose at her sides, and she found me where I had gone down among the counting frames with the slate still strapped to my arm, and she looked at me for a while. Then she said, "You keep the records." I said that I did. She said, "Then go and correct one." That was all. She did not raise her voice. She turned and walked back down the terrace toward the thrashing-yard, and the work that the morning had interrupted, and the world went back to being the world, the wind moving its too tall grain in long, slow combs, and she left me alive on a red-line world with a slate full of wrong words, and the whole long passage back to conquered space to think about every one of them. I have corrected the record. The world is struck from the ledgers in a red hand, as the old surveyors meant it to be, with a margin note that I wrote myself, and that no tidying will reach if I have any say, and the note does not say green, and it does not say surplus, and it does not use the word the conquered likes least to write, because the word concedes that the catalog can be wrong about the most important thing there is. The note says only what I saw, in the plainest language I have, so that the next adjutant who looks at gold terraces from orbit and feels the small, clean satisfaction of a balance about to be brought into order will read it before he writes compliant in the margin and sends 1,100 down into a yard to find out, in the hard gold light that hides nothing, what was waiting there the whole time, unhurried, with its hands folded, having already decided exactly how far it would let them come. We thought the harvest was the thing we had come to take. We were the harvest. They simply waited for us to ripen, standing aside in their own yard while we walked all the way in, and then an old woman lifted one hand without heat and brought the year in.